Hey there, it's Jack from the Curly Community Garden, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to compost effectively. Now, the compost program down at the garden is one of our most important projects. We're able to reduce the community food waste, feed our worms, and put all of that goodness back into the soil to help us grow food, all with the help of you. Now, composting is fairly simple, but it is important to get it right so that we can keep our volunteers happy, keep feeding the worms, but also reduce the burden of waste in the community. So let's go through how to compost effectively. So put simply, composting is the process of decomposing plant and food waste. So this relies on a healthy mix of nitrogen and carbon material. So examples of carbon or brown materials are things like dried leaves, coffee husk that we use down here at the garden, or even newspaper. And examples of nitrogen or green material is your food waste. So that's things like celery, rock melon, or maybe even banana skins, things that you're going to be bringing from home. So you will be bringing your green waste or your greens down to the garden. So let's go over some things that you're going to need to know before you bring your waste down to the garden. So when you're at home, we recommend keeping a bucket nice and close to the kitchen so that when you're done chopping up all your food, you can put your scraps straight into the bin. A nice little tip is to line your bucket with a bit of paper, just like you would a baking tin. And what that does is it makes it easier for you to clean your bucket when you do empty your scraps into the compost bins, but also it allows a little bit more brown material to get into our bins as well, which we are going to love. So when you are putting things into your bucket, firstly, avoid putting any non-food items. So these are things like rubber bands that you might find on a lot of the fruit and veg in the shops, tea bags, stickers that are on a lot of the fruit and veg, and of course, plastic like Glad Wrap or anything else there. It's also important to note that we don't want any biodegradable bags such as cornstarch bags because unfortunately they don't actually biodegrade that quickly. Okay, secondly, just put fruit and veg scraps into your bucket. So avoid putting things like bread, rice, pasta, dairy, and any meats. Unfortunately, this does attract a lot of pests and vermin to the bins. And thirdly, make sure you chop up your scraps, okay? Because our worms absolutely love finely chopped food. It gives them a little bit more surface area to feed on, but also it makes the breaking down process a lot easier. So chop up your scraps finely, especially those big food items like pumpkins, potatoes, or even things like leeks. Make sure you tear them up a little bit more before putting them in the bin. And make sure you avoid things like seeds, as seeds take a long time to biodegrade, and unfortunately that won't be great for our bins. And finally, make sure you try to bring your scraps down to the compost bins when they are fresh. We don't want your bucket going to slime and sludge, because if you do bring it down to the garden and put that in our bins, it does make them very smelly and creates moisture problems. So first and foremost, keep it fresh when you bring it down to the garden. Okay, so once you're down at the garden with your kitchen scraps or your greens, you're going to want to find a feed me bin. So on all of the bins, we are going to have labels. They're either going to say feed me, as you can see here, or another bin might say please do not feed. So you want to find the feed me bin, which often has a bag of browns next to it, okay? Now, if you bring your scraps down to the garden and there are no feed me bins, unfortunately that means our compost program is either full or closed for that time. So you're going to have to take your scraps home, unfortunately. So once you get to the feed me bin, you're going to take the lid off, and then all you do is you pour your greens in, then grab some browns from one of the bags, and you want to put at least an equal amount of browns in. So I put a bucket there of greens, so I'm going to put at least 2 to 3 scoops of these coffee husks here that I've got. Okay, and adding just a little bit more browns than greens is a great thing. Helps keep it very healthy. Then all I'm going to do is chuck the lid back on. Happy days, I'm ready to head home. Now, once a week, our volunteers here help turn the compost to keep it aerated and speed up the process of composting. Once the bins are full, we then transfer it to our compost bay where we let it fully mature before then putting it onto our garden beds to grow even more food. So, to summarize, make sure you chop up your scraps before you bring them down to the gardens so that our worms can eat happily. Make sure you put your greens in the appropriately marked bins saying feed me. And lastly, make sure you add that bucket of browns, aiming to get a little bit more browns than greens. Thank you so much for being a part of the composting program down here at the Curlew Community Garden and helping reduce the waste that our community produces. And if you have any questions, of course, come down to the garden to meet us or shoot us an email.